All right, committee. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you everybody online and in person. This is a continuation of the hearing on Senate Bill 24. Before we get started, are there any bill introductions? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and continue with the hearing on the bill. Before we do, again, anybody wanting to follow the testimony online, go to Kansas Legislature website.org under the Senate Utilities Committee. And if you want to look at the testimony, it is there. You have to go to the miscellaneous and early release testimony files, and you can click on it. It's not exactly intuitive. It'll say select early release testimony files. You click here, select the date, and then it'll take you to those PDF files. All of our committee, all of our oral or WebEx conferees today, we have their written testimony in your folder. Everybody else is online. And the way we're going to run this today is the same as we did yesterday. We're going to devote this hour to opponent testimony. We will leave plenty of time for questioning toward the end of the session. We have a large number of conferees. Obviously, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll get as many as we can. So we're going to start off first with a neutral testimony today from Jeff McClanahan. This is a remote oral testimony from Kansas Corporation Commission Utilities Division. And Jeff, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got you. So go ahead with your testimony, sir.
Well, thank you, Senator Thompson, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Jeff McClanahan. I'm the director of the Utilities Division for the Kansas Corporation Commission. My testimony is relatively short. We note that we are neutral on SB 24 and indicate that sorry, looks like I got muted there again for some reason. But this is a policy decision for the legislature, but we wanted to provide you with some thoughts to help in your decision making. Primarily what we wanted to indicate is that any ban on natural gas or other carbon-based sources from a natural gas utilities perspective will most likely have the impact of increasing rates. Volumetric sales are a key component of setting rates. So if a utility is in a high growth mode and has high increasing volumetric sales over time, it is very beneficial for ratepayers. So assuming that any ban would be just prospective in nature, depending on the size of the municipality and the size of the future growth, impacts may be fairly minimal. But if it's a large municipality and with high growth, then the impact to rates for other ratepayers could be greater. And so just to clarify that statement a bit, it would affect all of the ratepayers within the utilities footprint, not just within the municipalities. So it will have the impact of spreading potentially rate increases over everyone. There's also the possibility of stranded assets to the extent that it's, again, prospective in nature. Some of the pipelines, the actual pipe in the ground, could be sized for future growth that would no longer be needed. And the gas utilities are currently in a replacement mode where they're replacing obsolete pipe and have quite a bit of capital expenditures going on. So to the extent that there is a carbon reduction goal established, as was mentioned yesterday, for example, with the city of Lawrence, that would have a much greater impact on rates, because now you're talking about eliminating a very large portion of the volumetric sales. Although from a practical perspective, that is a difficult concept to understand how you're going to replace the infrastructure or switch the infrastructure for existing customers from natural gas to electric when the relationship is between the utility and the actual customer. So with that, I think I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Mr. McClanahan, committee, do we have any questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the testimony. I'm asking a question that I didn't ask of our conferees yesterday, but Mr. McClanahan, you're probably even better in a position to answer it. Do public utilities have a responsibility to provide that service to all the customers in the district they serve?
They do. We have a statute that requires a utility to provide efficient and sufficient service. So in layman's terms, basically that means they have to have the infrastructure in place that is reliable and up to date and safe. And they have to have enough of their commodity, in this case, say natural gas, to provide all of their customers 24/7 during any period where it be a peak or a non-peak period.
And following up on that, if an individual or a business was in a district served by that utility, they would have to provide that service if that individual or business requested it.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions, committee? Thank you, Mr. McClanahan. We appreciate it very much. Also, yesterday, Senator Francisco requested a map of the areas that would be impacted, and our research staff have provided these maps for the committee. One of them shows the gas public utilities, the other shows the co-ops that might be impacted, and you can review those maps, and Ms. O'Hara can answer any questions about that. Yes, do you have some?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I also understand that Heather O'Hara is going to be providing a list of the utilities that would be impacted by this based on the statute.
Yes, that's correct. She just hasn't had time to print that out. Thank you very much. Okay, any additional questions for Mr. McClanahan? Any other? And we'll be moving on to we also have written testimony, by the way, from David Nickel from Citizens Utility Ratepayers Board and Stuart Little of Cities of Merriam, Mission, and Westwood Hills. Those, the PDFs of that testimony is online on, again, the utilities website. Okay, let's continue with our in-person oral testimony. And Zach Pastora from Sierra Club. Is Zach here? Okay, Zach. I failed to mention, all conferees reminded to identify themselves so that people online will know who's speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Zach Pastora, proud lobbyist for the Kansas chapter of the Sierra Club. And for those that don't know about the Sierra Club, we're one of the oldest and largest grassroots environmental organizations. We represent over 5,000 caring Kansans here in the state who want to enjoy, explore, and protect our great outdoors. I thought we could sail through the 7 C's in my opposition to Senate Bill 24 this morning. If you'll indulge me, let's start with C words. Number 1, thank you, committee, for the opportunity to have this discussion. It's a really important debate about our energy future. I specifically like to owe a thanks to the committee secretary, Sheila, for receiving all those emails and conferee testimonies. Number 2, Kansas Constitution, and I'm sure you'll hear this from other conferees that follow me, but the spirit of the Kansas Constitution starts out with the language that cities are hereby empowered to determine their local affairs and government, and then later ending with cities or powers and authority granted cities pursuant to this section shall be liberally construed for the purpose of giving to cities the largest measure of self-government. So that's the spirit of the law. I know you are aware of that. I know you uphold the Kansas Constitution, and I've heard the argument that uniform law is necessary to avoid a patchwork of regulation, but I'll say, where is the patchwork of regulation right now? And that brings me to C number 2, community. The efforts to explore a clean energy future is backed by popular demand. Lawrence's effort is a product of that local democracy in action. Okay, it didn't come out of nowhere. You heard about the examples in California, a few examples in California and other states. But in Kansas right now, there is only one city exploring the opportunity for a clean energy future, and it's way down the line. It's 14 years from now. This bill practically would preempt that one city in the future 14 years from now. So consider that 14 years from now. 14 years ago, wind was just in its infancy in Kansas. It was much more expensive, and now Kansas is one of the top producers of wind in the country. And now we have more wind as a baseload power source than any other form of energy on the electricity side. 14 years ago, the Southwest Power Pool just began their energy imbalance service. It predated the integrated marketplace we have today that benefits not just Kansas, but the other market participants in saving over $500 million annually in savings with that regional day-ahead market. 14 years ago, Kansas did not have an earthquake problem, at least a man-made earthquake problem. Today, wastewater injection from oil and gas operations have dramatically elevated underground pressures and has caused significant earthquakes for our south central portion of our state. So let me reiterate that let's not let our current challenges create a roadblock for local progress and opportunity, especially when it comes from freeing us from the burden of fossil fuels. I just want to say that where might we be 14 years from now in 2035 when that actual city ordinance language goes into effect? That brings me to my next C, cost. We talked a lot about cost yesterday, and you heard from opponents that banning natural gas, which they were talking about as of now, would create a significant cost burden for Kansans. Think about when these ordinances go into effect 15 years from now, how could that change? And let me point you to my testimony. You'll see the green tree at the top of the testimony. We're on the second page where I point out an independent think tank that studies energy, the Rocky Mountain Institute, prominent energy think tank, evaluated 7 different cities for all new electric single-family residents, and they found that, in fact, over a 15-year period, it would have a lower net present value cost and be advantageous or equivalent in annual savings compared to having a mixed fuel source hookup home. So that's for new buildings going forward, the cost savings over a 15-year period. That's really important to talk about cost here. Again, where will we be as energy efficiency programs, renewable energies, energy stores become cheaper in the long run. Let's talk about the next C, co-equals. Senate Bill 24 wouldn't be as unfair if all energy was created the same. It's not. There's health effects from certain energies versus the others. We got man-made earthquakes from certain energies versus others. We got thousands of abandoned gas wells that are left behind from certain use of fuels. Some use a lot of water. Some have a risk to contaminate water. And some forms of energy have been made over millions of years and are considered fossil versus utilizing renewable energy that is here in Kansas and replenished on a daily basis. And then finally, I do want to talk about choice. Senate Bill 24 is called the Energy Choice Act. Well, how about Kansans have the opportunity to choose of their utility providers? There's no choice there. We have one electric utility, one gas utility to choose from, monopoly utilities. How about choosing against having mercury in our predatory large fish? I don't remember asking a choice to avoid that, but that's been caused by continued coal use over many years. The choice about experiencing man-made earthquakes, the choice to opt out from increased health risks from polluted air or transmission power poles coming through our neighborhoods. Do we have choice against that? How about the choice against the perils of extreme weather and caused by the anthropogenic climate change? Okay, so this would erode the opportunity for communities, local democracy, to have that choice at the local level. And finally, concern. Out of concern in the respect of home rule, in the spirit of the Constitution, out of concern for Kansans and their community's interest in acting upon climate and the promise of clean energy future, especially for the economy of Kansas, let's table Senate Bill 24 until actual conflict happens down the road. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Pastora. Again, we'll hold our questions until I'll provide time at the end for any questions. We'll move on to our next conferee is Grant Mayfield. Is Grant here?
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Chair Thompson and the members of this committee.
Just identify yourself, Grant. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just
My name's Grant Mayfield. I'm appearing today as an individual in opposition to this bill. Thank you again for having me today. Now, in my written testimony, which I encourage each of you to review, I urge you to take action on climate change instead of on this terrible bill. It's terrible for several reasons, which I'm sure the other conferees will speak to. Among them, the affront to local control and home rule that this bill poses, the stifling of policy innovations to curb emissions at the municipal level, and the unnecessary effort it represents to protect an already lucrative industry. As I wrote in my submitted testimony, the free market has not and will not adjust quickly enough to incentivize sustainable technology and choices for consumers. We must regulate in order to stave off the worst effects of climate change, and the window in which we can do this is rapidly closing. In producing my written testimony, which you received, I offered something fairly emotional, because this is an emotional issue for me and the youth of Kansas, who can't begin to wrap our minds around our government's refusal to save our planet, to save ourselves from ourselves. It amazed me that even in the face of such a grave threat, this committee finds the time to protect the apparently struggling natural gas industry from the actions of elected city councils on behalf of their constituents. While watching yesterday's proponents, I considered using this time to respond to their arguments point by point. For instance, to explain the ridiculous fallacy of natural gas as a clean energy source. I even thought through a counter-argument to we're sending a signal that we're open for business in the face of the huge risks posed to every sector of the economy by climate change. My previous shock at this committee's continued refusal to act, however, was diminished as I researched the campaign contributions of yesterday's proponents, all 8 of them. In just the last election cycle, the 8 proponents of this bill gave $27,750 to the members of this committee, both Democrat and Republican, with the exception of Senators Corson and Pyle. That doesn't include the money accepted from other businesses in the industries which this committee regulates, and it doesn't include the independent expenditures spent on behalf of some of these campaigns. So, this bill, it will likely pass, but for only one reason, and that is money. This bill will pass because extractive industry has gotten so rich charging Kansans for the privilege to participate in the destruction of our planet that they can now afford to buy our government too. Now, I don't have tens of thousands of dollars to make political contributions, but I hope you'll consider my testimony nonetheless and act in the interest of my generation and our future. The time for crossing our fingers and hoping for a change is over. The time for action is now. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayfield. Our next conferee is Eric Sartorius of the League of Kansas Municipalities.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon in most parts of the state. It's been a long day. I am Eric Sartorius, Executive Director of the League of Kansas Municipalities, and I do appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 24. As some other conferees have alluded to, constitutional home rule was adopted by the voters of the state of Kansas in 1960. In municipal parlance, this is local control. The belief that the best governance comes closest with the people, and that cities and counties are areas where that policy is best contemplated and pushed forward. I think the important thing to toss out immediately is that cities don't have an incentive to drive away residents or to drive away businesses. That's the antithesis of a city. They want people there. They want to have a growing and thriving community. They want people to be there. And our cities go about it in myriad ways. Some folks focus on being a transportation hub. Some cities have really concentrated that their voters want to focus on amenities and a quality of life. There are 625 cities in Kansas, and I would say each and every one of them brings something different to the table and approaches things differently. I'd like to touch base on a couple of specific elements or concerns with Senate Bill 24, and the overarching one is that it's very broad-based in its construction when it looks at actions and even effect of actions that it will prohibit. So, for instance, if a city were to allow zoning or development in a particular area, which in some way or fashion, and I'll be honest, I've not come up with a good example of this, if that approved development somehow precluded an adjacent landowner from receiving any of the utilities that they sought, does that then, under Senate Bill 24, constitute an action which, quoting from the bill, prohibits, discriminates against, restricts, limits, impairs, or has the effect thereof on an energy choice for a business or residence? So the city could take an action which, in no intent of theirs, was about energy in any way, shape, or form, but had the effect, because that's what the bill says, had the effect of doing any of those things, they would be in violation of Senate Bill 24. Similarly, a concern in here is that cities negotiate franchise fees with utilities for the use of the public right-of-way. Is there a cause of action there if there's a difference in the rate that is charged to one utility versus another? Is that considered discriminatory? I don't believe that's ever been seen as the case, but I think Senate Bill 24 raises real questions as to if Kansas Gas Services has negotiated a 4% franchise fee, but Evergy has negotiated a 5% franchise fee with a city. Is that discriminatory through this if it has the effect of impacting energy choice of a business or residence? And I think that's a question there that I think would be useful for us to address and clarify. So if this moves forward, I think the franchise agreement question needs to be contemplated. And I know Mr. Vogelsberg and others are very open to having conversations. I've always worked well with them, and it would be something to discuss. Second, and I believe some other conferees either have or will contemplate this concept of sunsetting this legislation. The technology, the environment that we're in, both literally and figuratively, is rapidly changing, and to say that what is good law or good sense in 2020 is going to make sense in 2030 or 2060, I think is a real question. And I do want the final piece, and Mr. Vogelsberg caught me beforehand, clarifying that this would not impede a city's ability to choose for themselves what to do with their city buildings, because the bill does say that businesses or residences would have energy choice, but the city is both an owner and the government. So if they are telling themselves essentially to move to only renewables or to only do natural gas or something, that's just a piece that I think would be good for us to clarify, and I know that they've worked on some language. So at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, sir. And I believe, Mr. Sterling, our revisor, you were working on that, some of the language with Mr. Vogelsberg. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm working on some. Mr. Vogelsberg has submitted some language to me. I'm reviewing that. I'm looking at a couple options, and I'll be touching base with him and having something to put forward to the committee.
Okay, thank you, sir. Our next testimony comes from WebEx, and again, the written version of this will be on our website. This is Michael Allman from the Sustainability Action Network. Michael? And again, remember to identify yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Thompson and committee. My name is Michael Allman, speaking for the Sustainability Action Network. To begin with, I want everyone here to be equally aware that David Anderson, the new chair of the American Gas Association, said, renewable gases and zero carbon hydrogen will play a key role in decarbonizing the U.S. natural gas distribution system. That's a sea change, but let me elaborate. I imagine some in this area may not like it, but a week ago today, the world changed. The most knowledgeable players are now taking bold steps to address climate disruption. Whether you deny it or not, the climate is disintegrating before our very eyes. 2020 was the planet's hottest year. U.S. climate disasters in 2020 totaled a record 22, each costing $1 billion or more. Of California's 20 largest historical wildfires, 5 of them were in 2020. And according to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, the extreme drought now in western Kansas will expand eastward in upcoming decades. I want the chamber members to take note. The market is responding. Whether you ignore it or not, the economy, more than politics, is phasing out fossil fuels. Just yesterday, New York City announced the divestment of $4 billion in fossil fuel investments from its pension funds. And New York State's $226 billion pension fund is divesting from fossil fuels also. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, is dumping fossil holdings. They said companies should adopt plans limiting climate emissions or face divestiture. The Department of Interior held the long-awaited auction of gas and oil drilling permits in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and nobody came. You may see this Senate Bill 24 as a holding action, but really it's an act of desperation because the writing is on the wall. If fossil fuel companies don't retool their business plans, they will be caught with stranded assets, divestiture, or both. Rather than the Kansas legislature trying to shield from reality the soon-to-be extinct fossil companies, the Kansas Department of Economic Development can assist them in transition. You want choice? The options are plentiful. Companies could provide geothermal heating and cooling services using what's called deep enhanced drilling, borrowed, interestingly enough, from the fracking sector. Or companies could evolve to providing homeowners with electric heat pumps. Or companies could even continue selling gas if they invested in biogas, which is non-fossil methane. It's derived from feedlot waste, crop waste, landfills, and more. Or companies could generate hydrogen using wind energy and store it in the Kansas salt caverns, another great Kansas economic development. Finally, for those restaurateurs that were worried yesterday, while gas cooktops are polluting and cause asthma, electric induction cooktops are highly energy efficient and save money. And induction cooking is equally as pleasant and effective as gas cooking. I know. I cook with induction. Thank you very much, and I stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Mr. Allman? Our next conferee is Dorothy Barnett of the Climate and Energy Project. Dorothy?
Hello, Chairman. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine. Thank you.
Well, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Francisco, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my opposition to Senate Bill 24, the Energy Choice Act. My name is Dorothy Barnett, and I direct the Climate and Energy Project, a 14-year-old Kansas-based nonprofit. CEP works to support the transition to a carbon-free economy through programs and policy. Energy efficiency and renewable energy are not only good for our economy, but good for our health and our environment as well. Here in Kansas and across the nation, the clean energy economy is growing. And according to evidence outlined in a recent report, The Speed of the Energy Transition, we're clearly experiencing a rapid energy transition scenario. So the question before this committee today is if Kansas cities will have the freedom to benefit from their investments in the lowest cost resource, or whether the state will take away that home rule right. I've outlined in my written testimony the many reasons I believe this bill is problematic, and I appreciate your consideration of our position. In listening to the testimony yesterday, I was encouraged to hear conferees express their support for lower cost energy rates and energy options for the consumer. CEP has long been a champion for energy solutions that reduce rates, especially among low income populations who almost always bear more of the energy burden and the negative impacts of climate change. Many of you have heard me present before this committee about the need for a state energy plan. This legislation again highlights why an energy plan is so important. The City of Lawrence moved forward with a sustainability plan they felt was the best solution to meet the needs of their community. While I understand the argument that a patchwork of energy policy creates challenges for businesses, this underscores again why, as a collective body, the legislature needs to move forward with a state energy planning process before enacting pieces of legislation like the one before us today. Perhaps, had we had an energy planning process, the City of Lawrence and the gas companies could have found common ground about their future plans and how to advance in a new energy economy, including conversations about renewable gas. If we were all working from a plan that included the input of all industry stakeholders, I like to think we wouldn't need a broad piece of legislation that strips away local controls from our cities. Thinking about the challenges among our Clean Energy Business Council members who have seen their businesses greatly impacted from a patchwork energy policy, I do believe we need consistency. The businesses represented by the Clean Energy Business Council have consistently come before this body to share their stories about how a patchwork of regulations and rate-making policies are creating winners and losers. Small businesses such as they are rarely the winner. While I don't support SB 24 as written and urge the committee to consider an amendment that would sunset the prohibition in 5 years, I hear and appreciate the many voices standing up for lower electric rates and energy choices. As we continue this dialogue, I'm encouraged that other areas where energy choice is restricted, more specifically in regard to residential solar installations, we can all proceed in uniform on the need to reduce barriers and regulations that impede small business and residential customer opportunities to install solar and battery at their properties. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Ms. Barnett, for the sake of time, because I want to allow enough time for the committee to ask questions, the next conferees, as far as we can get into the testimony over the next 10 to 12 minutes, try to only, in the sake of not being redundant, just try to add to the testimony with anything that hasn't been said, and that would help us a lot. Next up is Alan Baumann. Mr. Baumann?
I had to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Alan Baumann. I'm a retired physician from Prairie Village. And thank you, Chairman Thompson and members of the Senate Utilities Committee. I care deeply about the health and well-being of Kansans, and that's what I'm going to speak primarily about. The future comes to us very quickly, quicker than our imagination allows. In 2000, the dot-com bust, many people questioned the use of the internet. Since then, vinyl and CD has been superseded by Spotify and Apple, Blockbuster by Netflix, Sears and Kmart, Amazon. There is a similar revolution in energy. Solar and wind is cheaper than fossil fuels already. Kansas potentially is in the top 5 for both wind and solar, and that's shown by our decision to build the Grain Belt Express transmission line. This will bring 8 million $8 billion in revenue to the state and associated jobs of 22,000 in constructing it and 1,000 permanent jobs, while we supply electricity to Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. Understandably, fossil fuel industry is resisting and looking for further subsidies when through the U.S. they already received $649 billion in subsidies, and I think that this is just the first chip in Kansas, and we are going to see more of this action. But what I'm primarily concerned about is air quality. In the Kansas City metro area, we frequently suffer from ozone alerts. For those that live in the metro area, you're familiar with the gray cloud that overhangs our city during these alerts. And this causes significant problems both with our children and adults, those suffering from pulmonary disease and cardiovascular disease. The American Lung Association has given Kansas City a grade of D for ozone. We need to be able to clean up our air. Please do not remove any of the tools that we have available to us. Please allow us to proceed as our elected officials deem most proper. Our needs are not the same as they are in rural Kansas. Your rural Kansans already have access to clean air. Let us achieve the same, and I thank you, and I'll stand for questions at the end of testimony.
Mr. Baumann, appreciate that. Our next conferee is Kent Rowe. Kent, are you online?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the commission, I'm Kent Rowe. I was the mayor of Longton, Kansas, ran on the Green Party ticket. I am now co-chair of the Kansas Green Party, and I was the evaluator at the 51st Annual Power Symposium for paper presentations. And I'd like to speak to you about marketing products from Kansas. There's a feedlot in Ulysses in Kansas that has a solar array. They can claim carbon-free or carbon-reduced products from those beef cattle. And it also attracts populations of small towns, and we have that policy in place to be able to market products made from either carbon neutral or carbon negative. We're even approaching carbon negative products now. Schools now require improved ventilation, which means additional air changes per hour, hence the increased loads for these schools for better ventilation, and electric school buses, which can actually run schools and power schools during these times. In the inner cities, we're reducing to reduce soot, hydrocarbon pollution within high risk and underserved communities. I have here a sign that we can utilize for ultra low emission zones for Wichita Transit, which is now running electric buses. The farm community, electric on-farm vehicles and implements, you know these are coming. Deutz, AGCO, John Deere, all are marketing now equipment that is charged by, or can be charged by wind and solar and pulled through fields. Therefore, being able to market their products with a reduced carbon footprint. Charging infrastructure for electric vehicles is desperately needed. Generation, storage, flow batteries, DC coupling, thermal storage, and in the inner cities, off-grid operation. We're going behind the meter with carports, pergolas, solar patio covers, and shed roofs. There is a schism now between the large investor-owned utilities and the cooperatives. We are on a cooperative here. We're happy to supply, and we're generating now. You might be able to see behind me is a wall-mounted device, and that's a heat pump mini split. And that's what we heat now, besides the solar that we come in through these large windows. So we're going in that direction. And I've also conferred on developments that want to build multi-family homes utilizing a microgrid approach for clean energy. This is a marketing thing. Should be independent of oil and gas, and some places wind is not welcome too. I understand that, but we have to have that choice. And as a former mayor of a small community in Elk County, Kansas, we desperately need that for commuters and being able to market products in their various environments. And we're coming to the parades, state fairs, county fairs. We'll be there. And when we voice these products and show these products off, this is going to be a surprise to somebody what this committee is trying to do with SB 24. I am in opposition to that. Thank you very much. I will stand for questioning later.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. We have time for one more conferee, and I apologize to the rest of those who are on our oral testimony. We won't have time to hear you today. We also have a number of written-only conferees that's available also on the website, but I'm allotting the same amount of time that we did for the proponents. So we'll give Margaret Carmer the last oral testimony of the day, and then we will open up to questions from the committee. Margaret?
Can you hear me, everyone?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I am Margaret Clamar, just a private citizen, and I am testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 24. Thank you, Chairman Thompson and members of the Senate Utilities Committee. It is wrong to place more importance on short-term economic gain than the health and prosperity of future generations in the planet. During the past century, coal, natural gas, and oil served us well by powering our homes, providing efficient transportation, and fueling our economy. However, these energies had the unfortunate side effects of polluting our air, water, and soil, making us sick, and exacerbating climate change. We are now living in the 21st century and must say goodbye to these outdated and increasingly harmful extractive technologies. It is understandable that those in the natural gas sector should feel shock, anger, and denial over the demise of their industry, but it is time to move on. Please join us in our efforts to power the economy with sustainable, earth-friendly, renewable sources of energy. My husband and I live on a small, sustainable farm just north of Big Springs, which is halfway between Topeka and Lawrence. We realize that the priorities and concerns of our community in the eastern portion of the state may differ from those living in central or western Kansas. That is why we support home rule and oppose Topeka issuing edicts which assume that one size fits all. Although we are not entirely off the grid, about 5 or 6 years ago, we put solar panels on our barn in addition to installing the solar tracker. At the same time, we converted from propane to geothermal heating and air conditioning system. Sometimes we are asked how long it will take to recoup our investment. The cost was not the most important concern for us. We and a growing number of Kansans enjoy our natural surroundings and are all in when it comes to preserving and protecting it. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. That concludes the oral testimony, and again, written testimony is available online. So I'm going to open it up to any committee questions that we have for any of the conferees. Does anyone have any? Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Sartorius. May not have, Sartorius, I may not have pronounced it. So I think one of the strong concerns has been this regard for home rule. And yet, my understanding is that most cities made a determination about the public services that they were going to provide, whether it be water, trash, gas, or electricity. So how does that opportunity to have made that choice affect the consideration of home rule?
Trying to follow that one.
So I'm saying, you know, cities have home rule, and one of the things they've done is make a choice about the utility services that their residents will have. Some of them the cities are providing. Some cities chose to take advantage of investor-owned utilities. So I'm saying, I'm trying to question, did they have that choice? Do they still have that choice?
Like, yeah, so now I see what you're saying. I guess the question on top of the question is, do you get one bite at the apple? Do you only get to make one policy choice one time for your city, and then you set the globe turning? And I don't know, you know, there was probably, I'm trying to think of other instances. I don't know that I have one offhand, but I guess the question is, we revisit things all the time. I mean, you all didn't pass a tax bill last year and you're done. And taxes are going to be what they're going to be. Or with broadband, how many times we had 3 or 4 times over the past 6 years where we didn't set broadband policy once and set it and forget it. So I think there's room there to revisit things.
So, and my understanding is some cities have decided, well, we're going to provide a trash service, you know, and change that. So, you know, one of my questions really is, does a community have the ability to become a municipal utility for their residents? And maybe that's a better question for the KCC.
Okay, and I guess the only one that I would share with you there is, I know the city of Pittsburgh over the past couple of years had discussions with Evergy about potentially acquiring the nuts and bolts, I guess, if you will, of the electric system and becoming a municipal electric utility. I do not believe they're pursuing that now, but that was an option for them.
Senator Francisco, or do you want to, did you have another question?
I don't have other questions if no one else has, well, Senator Corson.
Senator Corson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is probably a question for maybe Mr. Sartorius or maybe Mr. Pistora. My question is, we really focused on this idea of banning natural gas, and that was sort of what we focused on yesterday. But this language in section 1(2)(b), I mean, to me, that is so broad. And I'm just wondering if it would cover things like prohibiting a municipality from offering a certain incentive program or a rebate program or a tax credit that wouldn't be a ban on any particular energy source, but would maybe incentivize use of wind or incentivize solar or incentivize electric. Would there be anybody who would be able to kind of answer that, just given that broad language of whether this is just focused on bans or if this would also apply to restricting municipalities from offering incentives, rebates, tax credits, things of those nature?
Any of the conferees care to answer that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric Sartorius, again, League of Kansas Municipalities. I don't know if I want to answer it, but I will try to answer it. I believe there was written testimony from the city of Overland Park that raised that issue a little bit, that if they are working on a development agreement and then there is some incentive for them to incent green technologies or something else, I believe they had a concern that the language would be that broad. And I'd like to study that a bit more.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me the time to find some of the other testimony. I was in particular looking for some testimony that was submitted on on behalf of the city of Lawrence, but it didn't say City of Lawrence, it had the name of the Sustainability Advisor. And there, Mr. Sartorius will probably be able to help us with this as well. The concern here was, would this bill limit the ability of cities to stay in alignment with the International Code Council International Building Code? So if there's something in a building code that would favor one particular source of energy, is that an issue? And I do respect all the work that our cities are doing to try to encourage sustainability. The new codes that Lawrence has offered that we've worked under have really made a huge difference in terms of efficiency. So any comments on that, or?
My Fitbit's enjoying this. I believe with respect to codes, there'd be something to look at a little bit further. When a code is adopted by one of those, Senator Peterson might be able to speak to some of this as well. Municipalities can adopt the code in whole or in part. So I would suspect, I'd want to dig into it a little bit more deeply, but if there was a part of the code that was in conflict with state law, I think a city would have to exempt or pull out that portion of the code before adopting it.
So I appreciate that, and then follow up. Don't sit down.
More steps.
The committee did indicate that we would get some help from some of the conferees yesterday on an amendments, and I'm wondering if you would also be willing to help with language regarding the franchise agreements, and then clarifying, a city's ability. So I think there's an understanding that we want to allow municipalities to be able to make choices about their buildings. And I think another question is how much are we supporting them making other investments when a community has decided that affordable housing is important and they are making an investment in that through tax dollars. My feeling is that also should give them a choice about how to decide the future of those dollars and whether a particular energy source will last for the lifetime of that investment. So help on that would be appreciated.
Very good. Happy to help and work with the reviser and the proponents on items.
I think the real intent of the bill is not to limit choice, but to give everyone choice to make those decisions, municipality-wise, public utility-wise, and everything else. Any other questions from the committee? Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to be quiet here. I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of energy efficiency programs, a lot of programs that we've passed that have conserved energy. I mean, the RPS, by 2020, we'd be 20% green energy. We hit it, passed it. Southwest Power Pool is the most greenest power pool in the country. Think about that. There's been times we've been over 50% green energy. You're in the heart of green energy in the country. The East and West Coast is not 50% green energy on any given day, ever, to my knowledge. And, now we're here. I remember back when we were fighting the coal debate over the power plant and trying to stop it from being built that cost the state billions of dollars of investment, jobs. And now, back then, natural gas was clean energy. Now they're considering it not clean. How are you going to build all the power lines you're going to need to meet the day-to-day use for electric all electric. I think it's just going to be crazy. And then where are you going to get that source of energy? Because Southwest Power Pool says we're almost at our cap of what we can produce and distribute. I'm sure we can do a little more, but we're at the top end. So you're going to have to build coal plants or maybe some more nuclear plants. You have to build more power lines if you're going away from natural gas. You got to build a lot more power lines. I heard a comment about the big lines, and you're going to have to put in twice the lines you got. So I understand cities, you know, that might want to go all electric, but I think they should have choice. And I'm going to fight for that here. I think natural gas is clean energy. And I don't know. I think we've gotten so wacko in this state that, I mean, we are the greenest, one of the greenest power pools in the country, are the greenest, one of the greenest states in the country. Take a look at all the wind turbines. That investment, I mean, we've created so much investment once we got the RPS and that issue resolved, billions of dollars. This is the place where green energy is happening. So,
Thanks, Senator.
thank you.
Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if Zach from the Sierra Club, he mentioned earthquakes. You know, everything I've heard that says they haven't tied earthquakes to what's going on with that. Do you have some information on that?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. You know, I would point you to the Kansas Geological Survey and the KCC that have done some research on what's called induced seismicity and some of those the volume and pressure of the wastewater injection from oil and gas activities is a pretty clear sign that that has created a man-made earthquake effect. It's really kind of hard to tell at this point what's man-made and what's natural, as recent earthquakes in Wichita count for, but no, it's very much a real thing. Happy to provide some information about that.
Thanks, Senator Fagg. Stay right there. I remember working in Oklahoma years and years ago, prior to any of this fracking, and there are natural earthquakes in Oklahoma, several hundred a year. Small ones, small seismic events. I do have one question for you. What source of energy would you propose we switch to for the quick ramping counter-cyclical generation that we need for wind and solar energy?
A good question, Chairman. And I think the quick answer is that in some ways it's a work in progress, but the quick answer is energy storage. That's the next frontier, you know, where renewables that come today, where energy storage could happen. And in fact, one of the largest energy storage projects happening here in Kansas, 500 megawatt solar plus storage project just outside of Gardner, Kansas. So it's really exciting. It's an opportunity. Until then, you know, I drove here in a gas-powered car, right? Would I like the opportunity for electric vehicles? Sure, you know, but again, this is a work in progress. I'll just say that, you know, for this policy, it seems premature and you know, constraining for the opportunity going forward. So
I don't think you got the gist of my question.
Okay.
Right now, for wind turbines to operate, when there is no wind, we have to, for every turbine that we put online, we have to have an equivalent amount of generating capacity to pick up the slack. Sure. So in other words, you know, the variability of wind on the grid, we're using natural gas for most of that at this point. What other source would we use? We can't use base load because base load can't respond quick enough. So you can't use coal and you can't use nuclear. So what other source would we look to?
Right. So yeah, the difference in balancing power, you know, right now we do use natural gas, and there's advantages to that because we can keep more of the wind online as a base load power. But also speaks to the importance of this regional power pool that we have to kind of balance those energy needs at a given time. So I take your point. I guess I'll take your point. But also don't let that stop us and our local communities that want to try to work for new technology to provide that niche role, et cetera. So, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee? Senator Olson?
Just a follow-up comment. The point is, when you start up coal, it takes 6 to 8 hours. to get it up to capacity. When you start nuclear, it takes a long time to get it up. You know, natural gas, they can turn the key on and be running 100% in 5 minutes. That's what he's talking about. If you don't have natural gas, what other form of energy are you going to be able to turn on the key and fire it right up? Because if you can't, you're going to have to run base load. Because when the wind's not blowing, you got to be able to have power. I definitely understand the regional point, but without natural gas, this whole thing doesn't work.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a quick comment regarding that. And again, we are so lucky to be part of the Southwest Power Pool and have day-ahead forecasts and day-ahead marketing. I am giving, my husband's birthday is January 30th. I think I'm going to be able to give him over 60% wind on that day, according to our forecast. And because it's forecast, we have that opportunity to manage the coal or other sources in a much more pragmatic way than we could before. Unfortunately, right now, most of that management is still fossil fuels. But again, as we work for methane gas, we're going to be looking for those alternatives. But I would say gas is a logical one, but again, with the day-ahead forecasting, more opportunity to address it in more ways.
Senator Olson?
Been the Southwest Power Pool. I've watched how they do the next day trading. I've seen it actually in work. Yeah, they do forecast, but they also run it in every 5-minute increments. And, you know, when the wind dies somewhere where it's not forecast, what do you think they do? They turn on a gas plant. Yeah. Well, I've actually seen the rooms and the TVs. I've seen the power move in each direction. And, you know, when they have a load that's not meeting capacity, they got to turn on a gas plant. You're not going to get rid of gas.
If I may, before we adjourn, I know a lot of our conferees today expressed their concern over climate change, carbon dioxide, and how it impacts our climate and the temperature of this planet. A lot of folks said I had a lot of wind for 40 years on television, but I do want to allay fears of some of our younger conferees that there's been a number of different studies on CO2. One just came out this last September. William Happer and William Van Weingarten have done extensive studies on carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide does not absorb every bit of the infrared spectrum. It's a very, very narrow portion of the infrared spectrum is affected by carbon dioxide, and it doesn't absorb it. It's like resonance. It absorbs some of that temporarily and then slows it down on the heat's way out to space. So carbon dioxide actually stabilizes the planet's temperature. And the study by William Happer and Van Weingarten, who are both physicists, show that our infrared greenhouse gas is saturated for the planet, which means that at the current time, we could double, triple, quadruple the amount of carbon dioxide on the planet right now and have zero impact on temperatures because the carbon dioxide is very, very limited in its scope and ability. So I just wanted to bring that up to allay any fears about additional carbon dioxide. And with that, I think we will adjourn. Thank you all.